Welcome, everyone. I'm Catherine Lavender, the Data Project Manager for NACDA, and this is our NACDA Data on Aging podcast series. NACDA is the National Archive of Computerized Data on Aging at ICPSR at the University of Michigan, and we're funded by the National Institute on Aging. We seek out and preserve data relevant to gerontological research, kind of like a data library, curating the data as needed to promote effective research use. And we share the data with the research community at no cost. We are proud to say that we are one of the largest libraries of data on aging in the United States, offering opportunities for secondary analyses on major issues of scientific and policy relevance. We hope to connect with the gerontological research community using this podcast series and plan to highlight data resources and researchers, talk through data concerns, and learn the stories behind the projects. Find out more about NACDA and ICPSR by visiting nacda-aging.org.
Today, we're talking with Dr. Darrell Hudson. He's professor and chair of the Department of Health Behavior and Health Equity at the University of Michigan School of Public Health. Dr. Hudson completed his doctoral studies at the University of Michigan School of Public Health, where he also received his MPH. He has earned a BA in psychology from Morehouse College. And before coming to Michigan, he was a professor of public health at the Brown School at Washington University in St. Louis and director for the Center for the Study of Race, Ethnicity, and Equity at Washington University. Dr. Hudson's career is dedicated to the elimination of racial ethnic inequities in health. His research focuses on how social determinants of health, particularly racism, affect multiple health outcomes. And his current work focuses on the investigation of how the process of upward social mobility affects the health and well-being of Black Americans. He's also investigating the integration of mental and physical health using a life course stress framework. So we are very excited to talk with Dr. Hudson today, or I am for that matter. Why don't we dive right in? So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Catherine. I really appreciate the opportunity to share about the work that I'm doing.
Great. So why don't you talk about how you got involved with your research?
Yeah, sure. So I've always been interested in mental health. I was a psychology major in undergrad, as you mentioned in the intro. And so I was always very interested in common mental health conditions like depression and anxiety, um, stigma, and how stigma could be related to non-treatment. Also interested in access, so whether people had adequate access, whether it's affordability or simply availability of services. But as I got into my PhD program here at Michigan a long time ago, I started to think a little bit broader. I started to think about a social determinants of health lens. And so that's what really led me to start thinking a little bit more upstream and kind of the broader determinants that impact not just mental health, but also physical health. So I guess in this stage in my career, I mentioned how mental and physical health fit together. So the integrated health piece of it all. As mentioned before, the stress and health piece is also very important to me. So the stress process, how human beings take social stressors and process them, think about problem solving, how we cope with stress, how stress gets under the skin. And so that also, at least in my estimation, the literature that I've covered and the contributions that I've made through my research, stress does indeed get under the skin. And so the life course piece and the aging piece is newer. I will say that aging folks are very convincing and they're very enthusiastic and generous, and they want you to get involved in the aging work. So I never thought about myself as an aging researcher ever. I still don't think about myself as an aging researcher, but I think folks within that tent are so generous and so welcoming. They're like, come on to the aging boat. And so I've started to think about life course perspectives. I've started to think about especially as we have an aging population. So that's something we have to think about with from a societal perspective is we're all aging every moment we're here. Oxidation is real. My niece tell me that all the time. And so um, that's how I started doing more of the aging related work. So that's a long way to say, how this all fits together in my eyes in terms of social determinants of health, stress and emphasis on integrated health across the life course.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. And I mean, I think I wonder, I guess, too, about how people cope with stress differently across time. I'm sure that even though you maybe didn't mean to get into aging research realm, just naturally because of, in doing your own research and seeing how that changes over time, that's kind of what happened. And then, you know, you've been awarded grants from the National Institute on Aging, and you've been awarded grants from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and one of our archives, the Health and Medical Care Archive, is funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And, so yeah, like it's kind of hard to study health without studying the life course in a way. Um, but yeah, so
Yeah,
thank you. That's
yeah,
interesting. I
absolutely.
like that quote from your niece too.
Yeah, yeah, they tell me that I'm aging every day. My back too, although not as loudly as my knees right now. But
Oh no.
yeah, but yeah, it's I think stress is so important. Stress is ubiquitous, but like you said, there's so much difference and unevenness in the patterning of what coping resources people have,
Oh yeah.
as well as the stressors in their day-to-day lives. So, how much control or perceived control do you have over your, lifestyle and your work and what you do for a living and what stressors can be
Right.
unaccounted for day to day. So, stress is super, super huge.
Right, right. As you said, the access is going to be different based on the type of work that you do and insurance that you have
Yep,
and your community
yep,
and whether or not you have transportation,
yep.
just all kinds of things. But why don't you talk about the central objectives of your recent work?
Yeah, sure. So, so much of my career, embarrassingly, has just been through happenstance. Like, I initially had this interest in depression, and I met a colleague. It must have been 6 or 7 years ago now, Ganesh Babalal, who was in the Department of Neurology back at Washington University in St. Louis. And we just had coffee one day. We were just like, oh, we have similar interests, let's start kicking around some ideas of how we can collaborate. And that was kind of our initial foray into how we formulated aging research characterizing health equity via social determinants of health, which we affectionately call ARCHES. So if you haven't been to St. Louis before, there's a giant arch. I think it's 660 feet, but
Yeah.
who's counting? The largest monument in the United States. But arches for the mouthful that we had, to make it a little bit more accessible, in addition to recognizing where we're at. So recognizing where we were located in St. Louis. And so that was our first initial meeting. Um, Ganesh was the one who really told me about how depression could be related to Alzheimer's disease and related dementia.
Mm,
And I had never really thought about it before because, again, I'm not an I didn't think of myself as an aging researcher.
sure.
And so we started to flesh out what a collaboration could look like, and that turned into an NIA proposal. And it was very ambitious. The goal was and still is to collect a new cohort, prospective cohort, that we will follow over time of completely healthy, cognitively normal Black Americans who live in St. Louis. And our
Mhm.
number was ambitious. We wanted to have an N of over 300.
Okay.
And a lot of people told us there's no way you can do this, because there's such difficulty in recruiting that particular population. The procedures used are invasive, oftentimes very painful.
Yeah.
And so we've been able to defy that. We've got over 300 participants right now, and going. We've got people coming in from multiple assessments. We've got a good number of people who've submitted, or I should say, consented to being part of a subsample of an MRI scan. So we're really, really fortunate. So that's the main work that we're doing right now. These are, again, cognitively normal, healthy Black Americans, over 300 folks who participated. who are aged 45 years and older, and they're primarily in the greater St. Louis area. So that includes St. Louis City, St. Louis County, as well as outlying areas, as well as Illinois. Illinois is right across the river from St. Louis, so
Mhm.
that's also considered the metro St. Louis area.
Wow, that's so important. And I'm so happy you got more than your goal of respondents. And, you know, I've heard that it can be difficult to get, people to volunteer to be in these kinds of studies. And then also like, consent to just the research process in general. So
Yeah.
yeah. Um, well, actually, normally I would ask about your major findings, but I think right now it might be a better place to ask you to talk about the challenges of the research process
Yeah,
and
yeah,
then touch on major findings since we're kind of going into that way
yeah,
anyway.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, the challenges and the barriers were steeply stacked.
Mm-hmm.
The timing of this, I believe we got our notice of award in 21. So we were still in, sort of the middle
Lockdown.
phase of the pandemic.
Yeah.
There's variation across, city and county, whether you're, locked down or not. Certainly masking. People weren't coming to the places that you typically look to recruit.
Yeah.
So people weren't going to church or community centers and things like that. So it was really, really challenging initially. Um, but I'll say the force of will and determination, inventiveness, I have to really underscore the role of Ganesh Babalal, who's the co-PI on this study. He's
Mm-hmm.
a outstanding leader, shows up in the community. He's a great partner to work with from a collaboration perspective, and it really cares about this work and wants to be of service to the communities that we're seeking to help out. And so we've had a great study coordinator the whole way along as well, Alexis Walker, who just led a paper that was published in Alzheimer's disease journal, and we talked about our recruitment strategy. So essentially, it was boots on the ground, anywhere you can go that was safe to go, whether it was outside, whether it was masked. We were showing up in those places. We also formed a community advisory board to try to help us to figure out not just for recruiting purposes, but also for sustainability. So how can we make
Sure.
this work last into the future? Again, it being a prospective study, so we wanted to make sure that we establish a board that can help us to troubleshoot through some of the challenges that we were experiencing at the time, but also to think about what might be on the horizon. So the community advisory board has been really helpful as well. I don't think we'd be able to have met our recruiting goals. And I think that's our major takeaway, is that we've met our recruiting goals. People have had a really good time in the study as well. We've heard
Oh,
that
good.
directly from participants. I was back at WashU giving a lecture last week, completely unrelated. And one of the participants came up to me and said, "Hey, I've really enjoyed being in this study. It's been something I've learned about. I
Aw.
feel like my contributions are being valued." So that makes, from a research perspective, you oftentimes don't think about like the impact of your work like
Yeah.
on an individual, especially if it's not for a clinical trial that's developing some sort of cure or therapeutic or effective treatment. So doing sort of more of an epidemiologic study, it was really cool to hear someone say, "Hey, I really enjoy being in the study and interacting with you all," and to hear their enthusiasm. I think that's again how we were able to get the numbers that we got was people were enthusiastic about the study. They participated. They were like, "Hey, this is not so bad. Indeed,
Yeah.
I learned something. I want other people to learn. I want other people to participate." And so it's been really cool. And we have tried to be a good citizen in the sense of having some semblance, at least, of reciprocity. So we have a newsletter, we have resources that we try to provide at an annual participant brunch. So that
Oh,
branch continues to grow and grow and grow. Now we're looking for spaces that can hold like 600 people, as
yeah.
opposed to when we first started, when it was like 100 people or less.
Yeah.
So those are all ways that we've met those challenges, and also what feeds, the success of the research.
Wow. Yes, having people who care
Mm,
makes all the difference, both on the colleague side and on the respondent side. And you know, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I think it can be challenging to find ways to engage in a community nowadays. There's always opportunities, and if you look for them, um, but I could understand the respondents feeling some kind of reward for engaging
yeah.
in a community activity in this way, like they're contributing, to the study, but they're also contributing, to health community, aging
Mhm.
community, Black community.
Yeah.
And so, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's wonderful. So,
Yeah.
so what about the major findings?
Mhm. Yeah, sure. So again, I think one of our biggest contributions is figuring out how to do this and how to create a space where people feel like their contributions are valued and taken seriously, that there is some sort of reciprocity. And again, that's become accelerant to get other people involved in the study. I would say, in terms, so we've got a paper that's out now where we talk about what we did to recruit, especially during those challenging circumstances and that phase of the pandemic that we were in. In addition to that, there's this historic mistrust that Black Americans have, rightfully so, thinking about, historic violations of trust within the biomedical community. So
Sure.
we've had to hit those things head on, and each city, each region, each locale has its own sort of under the radar violations that don't rise to the level of, say, a Tuskegee. uh,
Right.
there's these small things that you hear growing up, whether you're from Baltimore or Detroit or St. Louis, and there's these, so we had to deal with a lot of those things. So we outlined some of those things. So that's one of our major contributions, that, at least from my perspective, and just
Yeah.
trying to build a perspective study like that. We're still writing, and we're not quite done with collecting data and analyzing, but we do have a couple papers that are set to, we've submitted at least, so fingers crossed. We know the
Hmm.
publication process right now is kind of upside down, and it takes a little
Right.
bit longer than it used to. But we have papers that go back to me and Ganesh's initial interest around depression and Alzheimer's disease and related dementia. There's not really a surprise there that depression is associated with um, markers of Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah.
So looking at how we assess that, preclinical Alzheimer's cognitive composite scores, we didn't find the same thing for the MoCA, which is oftentimes the most widely utilized assessment for Alzheimer's disease. We're not quite sure. Our speculation is that perhaps there's just different ways that these measures assess cognitive decline. It's also difficult to disentangle, say, from years of schooling or quality of schooling within certain neighborhoods. So again, this is
Hmm.
St. Louis City, St. Louis region, I should say, and hypersegregation is a major factor. It has shaped tremendously the resources that people have, especially around health promoter resources, underscoring education, transportation, healthcare access, so on and so forth. So that might be some of the reasons why we're not seeing the same sort of relationship between depression and, say, the MoCA, which is the most common assessment.
Right.
Um, Within that, and I guess towards the end, I'll talk about like things that I didn't anticipate, or sometimes I just hate having a hunch and being right about it, because most of the things that I have a hunch about in the research world mean bad news. And
Oh,
so I've got another line of work that looks at what we call cost of upward social mobility. So are
Mhm.
there health costs that Black Americans particularly pay as they move up the social economic hierarchy? And
Mhm.
so because the US is so segregated, oftentimes Black Americans are having to move out of
Mhm.
their neighborhood of origin to seek out better schooling, more opportunities beyond education, occupational status, where you live, et cetera. And so what we're finding is that, um, especially for Black men, there's evidence of that happening in the form of people are experiencing stress, they're experiencing hardship, and also exposure to racial discrimination. When they experience those things exacerbate um, depressive symptoms. And
Sure.
so, and it's not explained away by education. In fact, people who have more exposure to discrimination actually have greater levels of depression within the sample. And that jives with other work that I've done in the past. Again, I hate to, have that hunch or have that hypothesis, and it's like, oh, that was right. And it's unfortunate because usually for me it means that there's something, that a phenomenon that needs addressing. So that's
Yeah.
the factor that's there. So those are some of the kind of broad findings that we're pulling away so far.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing all of that, especially with it still being in progress. Um, as you noted, you said that you started in 2021.
Yep.
And so, yeah. And also, like, we all have our thoughts about how something's going to go, and that's based on, your own education, your own experience, and so, uh, it would be nice if you were like, I'm proven wrong here,
Yeah.
but the reality is that we still have a lot of work to do
Yeah.
in these areas. And like with depression, it's, often, especially with people as they get older, they get lonelier. And then it's
Mhm.
like, it's a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
They're depressed because they're lonely because they're depressed. You
Yeah.
isolate when you're depressed, and then add add like where you think you fit in to that,
Yeah.
it makes it even harder.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
So
Yes, the intersectionality piece of it. We all have multiple identities, so
yeah,
age, race, ethnicity, where you live, gender, and there's gender differences that can be explained by different roles that people play or even their connectedness. Like isolation varies by gender,
yeah,
oftentimes. And so that's something we get really concerned about for aging Black men, especially if they don't have a spouse or a partner. What can happen to folks? And that's always a again, I was giving a lecture last week in St. Louis, and it was to a community there, and people are really concerned about what can happen to people who are experiencing social isolation, especially for men who are not connected to anyone. So that's a
yeah,
major consideration.
yeah, yeah. Well, thank you again for sharing those details. So let's talk a little bit about, normally I would ask, well, a lot of times we're dealing with studies that um, the principal investigators have shared their data with us, but this data is still in the works. And so, um, we can talk a little bit more about maybe, um, do you envision making the data available for secondary analysis in the future? And like, if you have any advice to someone else doing similar research as you, working with longitudinal data on aging, working with this kind of data, and maybe even to like aspiring researchers about establishing themselves as trustworthy researchers within a community. But there's a lot in there. So just
Yeah,
take whatever pieces
yeah,
speak to
yeah.
you.
Yeah, we're always looking for collaborators. I can't only speak for myself, but our team is very collaborative. As I mentioned, Ganesh being very generous. He's helped so many people throughout his career. I try to help people where I can. We definitely would love to be in conversations about how to get the data out so that more people can use it. Um, I've never thought to myself that I've got the entire kit and caboodle inside of my head. I think having different perspectives, especially across disciplines and lived experiences, is really critical to
Yeah.
being able to explain what's happening in the world around us. So, so we're certainly open to folks connecting with us in the short term and the interim, till we get our kind of final numbers, and um, we're done with recruiting this phase. Again, we're going to try to follow people over time. So
Hmm.
hopefully, knock on wood, we'll get that next proposal, which we'll probably be thinking about pretty soon. But yeah, so in the short term, we're happy to collaborate, think about analyses, think about papers, encouraging people to reach out. We're also open to recruitment. So a lot of people who are doing this work around the country have experienced a great deal of trouble and challenges in
Hmm.
recruiting. So we have shared, through papers and through presentations, what we did in terms of how we were able to establish a community advisory board, how we were
Yeah.
able to show up, what sort of questions people typically ask when we're trying to get them interested in the study, where we've gone, those types of things. We're also really eager to help people with troubleshooting. I think one of the biggest things we're doing stuff like this that is very complex across multiple disease and body systems, and then trying to account for a very complex world around us
Yeah.
it requires major funding. And so you've got to be able to convince your peers who are in the study section that, hey, this is a worthy idea. You've got to convince your participants that, hey, this is a worthy idea that's worth my time and
Yeah.
contribution to the study. You've got to be able to frame things in a way that will get you to the funding table of consideration. So those are all things that we're interested in helping people to push along important, complex work that answers really thorny questions, but those questions are absolutely critical with the aging population, the growth of underrepresented groups, and within that, people who've been historically marginalized who also disproportionately bear health inequities throughout their life course. Those are all things that we have to think about. So we'd be happy to help folks think about not just utilizing our data, but also helping them with their own
Yeah.
ideas and getting them to get funded.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, that's great. And like, of course, as data archive, if you need any advice on sharing the materials,
Yeah.
I hope that you will consider NACDA and ICPSR. But
Yes.
um, but yeah, I mean, I that's one thing, that's a common theme whenever I talk with researchers. Um, like everyone we've talked to speaks to the value of interdisciplinary work and collaboration, and they all remember someone who helped them. And I think that I I don't know, it's wonderful to like see those connections being made. And I think it's inspiring the way that you talk about your colleague, Ganesh, and you know how you're both just so caring about this work. And thinking about like opportunities for collaboration or areas or um, meetings where you felt like you gained a lot from it. Are there any conferences or meetings or things like that that you would recommend?
Yeah, sure. I must admit, again, not being a traditional aging person, I have not gone to like
That's okay. It doesn't
the
have to be just aging.
gerontology meeting and
Yeah.
whatnot. But one that I really enjoy is the Interdisciplinary Association for Population Health Sciences, IAPHS. It is in the title is interdisciplinary. Um, it's a good quality meeting. It's usually a smaller crowd, so it's not overwhelming as a GSA or an APHA. But the content is really strong. The scholars are really thoughtful. So that's a meeting that I really, really enjoy. And try to go to that every year. I think that's become, if not my favorite, one of my most favorite meetings. Um, I go to different meetings for different reasons. Sometimes
Hmm.
I'm there to learn, sometimes I'm there because I was invited to present. But I'm always trying to look for meetings that I can expand my network and I can grow the knowledge that I have and try to think about ways that I can improve as a researcher. So learning something new is really important to me. So I always learn something new and make new connections at IAPHS. I am going to try to start making the rounds around the typical aging conferences in due time. I don't really have an excuse to do so because I think I'm an aging researcher now. So I don't think I have an excuse not to go anymore. So looking forward to those types of meetings.
Yeah. Well, if you decide to attend the Gerontology Society of America conference, we are usually there with a booth, so I hope you would stop by and say hi.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, but I mean, I think there's so many things research-wise and health-wise that aging has in common with, other population study topics. And so, and more and more, I think that like the National Institute on Aging has expressed that they really value research that does have those intersections
yeah,
of research and interdisciplinary and just a broader use and
yeah,
value. And so
yeah.
it's it I think it's great that you didn't have like a straight line to where you are, you know what I mean? So yeah, I don't think it's embarrassing at all. You said earlier that like it's embarrassing how much is happenstance. No, no, no. That's just serendipity.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah, and like I said, the generosity of folks, and I have to shout out one of my good friends and colleagues, Carl Hill, who used to be at the National Institute on Aging. He also graduated from the same department. We both got our PhDs from Michigan and Department of Health Behavior, and now health equity used to be health behavior and health education till this past year.
Yeah.
And Carl was at NIA, was instrumental behind a lot of the work that NIA does around the health disparity space and helped to write the health disparities framework that everyone cites and uses,
Yeah.
which is truly multi-level, is multi-sector, is thinking about broader contextual issues across disciplines. So just had to
Yeah.
shout out Carl for his contributions to that work.
Thank you. We love a name drop.
Yeah.
So, what excites you about being a researcher now?
Yeah, I would say it's two major things. Um, the exciting thing to me is not just research, it's getting the next generation of scholars ready. So the way I think about it is loading people into the sprinters blocks. Especially right now with so much uncertainty externally, how do we get people ready? So the next generation of scholars, so that when they're ready to take off, they're ready to really take on the baton. And
Yeah.
so that's the way I think about, again, loading people into the sprinters block so that they're ready to be the next generation of researchers and practitioners. And then they can be the ones that can hopefully get us to the next phase. And I always tell people my mission in public health is to put myself out of business. I consider myself a health equity researcher. So if the goal is to achieve health equity, then eventually I should be sitting in a rocking chair with nothing to do. And I realize that's probably, too ambitious. And I don't know if I'll be in a rocking chair in my lifetime. But that's what excites me the most is thinking about collective efforts that we can strive towards equity. I would say that kind of opposite side of that is something that excites me, but also is always very humbling is when, again, those hypotheses, those hunches, they bear out and not just in the work that I'm a part of, but also I see other people finding these things. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute, that's cool to have something that wow, that was spot on. But it's also like, wow, those are real people. Those are real people
Yeah.
suffering. Those are lived lives that are either shorter or living with disability or other morbid, it's just that's the thing that's humbling to me. So it's hard to get excited about it per se, But
Mm,
it's good to know that from a research perspective, and then again, striving towards equity and developing effective, sustainable solutions, that perhaps there's something there, and that's something that warrants greater resources that we can marshal in that way.
yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I love that. I think that that's a great goal, to put yourself on business for health inequities. So now you've got me thinking about other research that you've come across. Like, have you used any data like for secondary analysis that you think are worth noting?
Yeah, I cut my teeth at ISR, so to speak. So both teaching in the summer program, and also one of my mentors that I named my professorship after is James Jackson. James
Oh,
Jackson
yeah.
used to, be directive Institute for Social Research, and I could never claim to be anywhere near uh, the type of mind that James had and how influential he was to so many different people's careers. But that's kind of the cut of the shoe that I try to step into day to day. And so James was had outstanding legacy, and I'm so proud to be a part of that legacy. And one of his biggest things that he did was to be PI for the program for research on Black Americans,
Hmm.
National Survey of American Life,
Hmm.
NSL, which is part of a broader psychiatric epidemiologic set of studies. So the NLOS, National Latino Asian American Study, and NCRS, which is National Comorbidity Study Replicated. And so the downside is that, so that's why I wrote my dissertation off of secondary analysis of the NSAL. I always appreciated how broad the NSL is.
Yeah.
But the thing that I know now is that the NSL data are old. And so
Yeah.
we're talking about, going 20 years old now. And so the world has shifted a lot in the last 20 years. Things that we used to have or didn't have back then. Like, I'm sure back then there was a phone plugged into the wall, and no Zoom, and all sorts of things. There was no GPS. You had to like print out the MapQuest map. So there's so many things that are radically different now versus then. I'll shout out another one of my colleagues, Bree Mesick, in epidemiology here in the School of Public Health here at Michigan. um, Bree wrote a beautiful, outstanding proposal for the next phase of the National Survey of American Life, and it was scored really high, and it looked like it was going to go through, and then we're in one of those odd limbos where it doesn't look like it's going to get funded because of the kind of the current state of affairs.
Yeah.
But that's something that really, really excites me, just having the ability to get like an accurate snapshot of where we are contemporarily with regard to mental health and also the connection to aging. And
Sure.
Bree is on that same boat as well. I guess we have we're all influenced by James tremendously. So we all have this mind meld between like integrative health and mental health and aging. And so that's something that I'm hoping that we can get off the ground at some point in the near future. I think it's not just interesting and exciting, but it's absolutely critical for our field
Yeah.
understanding. And I think it stands to make substantial contributions to the general public. So I'm hoping that's something that we'll be able to unearth sometime soon.
Fingers crossed. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Yes. James was an excellent researcher and a wonderful person. He was
Hmm.
just very easy and friendly and
Yeah.
knowledgeable. So I appreciate you bringing him up. And yeah, I mean, it's been so great to talk with you today and learn more about the work that you're doing and about your collaborations. And I think now we're going to wrap up, and
Yeah.
I'm going to thank you for being here and thank other people for listening. And is there anything else you wanted to say before we end?
No, no, it was fun to talk about research. I feel like as an administrator now, I don't get to do as much research as I would like. And so
Oh,
I was like, wow, this is fun to talk about research.
good.
But it's been a while since I've been able to like, get my hands dirty, so to speak, with the work that we're doing. So this was fun.
Good, thank you. Thank you so much to our guest and to our listeners for joining us on this podcast. You can find links to studies we referenced by viewing the description and content below. If you have questions or ideas, please email us at icpsr-nacda@umich.edu.